my channel. Well, as you already know, this is a community medicine dedicated channel, and again in a continuation of the exam ready series because of the upcoming semester examinations of the 5th semester students. This is a comprehensive compilation of the different explain whys that comes in the paper 1 particularly, and this I will decode in 2 parts so that you, along with not only learning how to write the answer of this explain whys, you also come to know the basic concept behind it. So before I start off, the statutory remarks, please do subscribe to the channel. It's completely free. I would love to have you in this community medicine family, and to like, subscribe and share as much as possible so that more and more students have benefited from this. So let's begin. So in this particular part, I'll be taking up this bunch of explain whys. Let's start one by one. One of the very commonly asked explain why is that primordial prevention is a subset of primary prevention. So before you even start writing, let's get it clear what is primordial prevention and what is primary prevention and how are they connected. Well, if you look at this picture, a young boy, and you give him the health education that smoking is dangerous for health and you should not be smoking, and he keeps away from smoking as he grows up. So you're nipping at the bud at the very nascent stage when he hasn't even started smoking. So you're asking him and letting him know the dangers of smoking. That is primordial prevention for you. Now let's take it in a different dimension now. Here in this part, we see a man smoking. So he is already a smoker, but not with any overt clinical signs and symptoms of any disease for that matter that may be induced due to smoking. Now we give health education to this man that he can quit smoking and life gets better when you stop smoking, and eventually he leaves smoking. So when you stop a smoker from smoking, and that benefits him in the long run from having much lesser chances of developing the lung cancer or other associated diseases, that is primary prevention. So when you are stopping this smoking even before it has started, that is primordial prevention. Stopping the smoking before there has been any clinical signs and symptoms of any disease aggravated by smoking, that is primary prevention. So as you can gather from this, basically primordial prevention is acting at the very beginning of primary prevention. So it actually is a subset. So what you write is disease occurrence is determined with several biological, environmental, lifestyle and other factors, and primordial prevention is prevention of the emergence and development of the risk factors present in the community in which they have not yet appeared. Just as I mentioned, the students learning at school that cigarette smoking is injurious. And primary prevention is prevention of the disease through control of exposure to the risk factors. That is quitting of smoking to prevent the occurrence of lung carcinoma, which we discussed. Hence, primordial prevention comes across as primary prevention in the purest sense, as it also promotes health by intervening at the very nascent phase of emergence of risk factors. Hope you are clear by now. Different other explain whys also commonly asked in the paper regarding primary prevention and primordial prevention. There's a primary prevention is a holistic approach, since it takes into consideration of the whole scenario and intercepts at each of these levels. Primordial prevention method of choice for preventing chronic diseases, because it is nipping at the bud, as you can see. So these are the different formats of nearly the same thing. Coming to the second, explain why. Accessibility cannot be equated with acceptability of health services. So let us first understand what is accessibility, what is acceptability, and what is availability. Availability is the particular health service or facility being available to you, that it is there. Accessibility, the equitable distribution of the health workers, taking into account demographic composition, the labor mix, and the underserved areas or populations. Then acceptability is the health workforce characteristics and ability, the sex, the language, the culture, the age, to treat all patients with dignity, create a trust, and promote the demand for services. So it can happen, a health service may be available and accessible, but is not acceptable. So the health service might not be used when the quality of the health workforce is inadequate. Improvement in health outcomes will not be satisfied. So let's look at a scenario to develop a complete understanding. So let's look at this woman. She's a rural woman living in a village, and she right now is in the need of a breast imaging. This is a hypothetical situation. We are imagining a certain situation. Now let's look at the facility, that is breast imaging. So it is available in a city hospital. So it is available, but for that particular woman, it is not accessible because it's far off from her village home. Now, if the same service is available in a nearby PHC, then the service becomes available as well as accessible for the same woman. Now, let us look at it. If the service is offered by a male doctor, it may be so that the service is available, the service is accessible, but culturally it is not acceptable to the beneficiary to be checked by a doctor of different gender. It is not universal, but it may happen in certain cultural settings. So now you understand that a service may or may not be available. If it is available, it may or may not be accessible. Even if it is available and accessible, it may not be acceptable to the beneficiary. And this gives you a clear picture that accessibility and acceptability are not equivalent. Now coming to the very oft asked, explain why. WHO definition of health is flawed, or WHO definition of health has its limitations. It can be asked in different ways. Even sometimes the question comes as, WHO definition of health has defects. So whatever may be the format of the question, there are certain basic clauses which you need to remember about this particular aspect. First and foremost, let's recapitulate the definition of health as per World Health Organization. The current WHO definition of health, which was formulated in 1948 and revised in 1977, describes health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, with an ability to lead a socially and economically productive life. The most criticism of this definition concerns the absoluteness of the word, complete. So in relation to well-being, because complete is neither operational nor measurable, and it's too idealistic and broad-based. And since 1948, the demography of the population and the nature of the disease have changed considerably. Aging with chronic illnesses has become the norm. In this context, the World Health Organization definition becomes counterproductive. Why? As it declares all people with chronic disease and disabilities definitively ill. Some argue that health cannot be called a state at all, because it is a dynamic, it keeps changing. Then another important aspect that limits its use, it minimizes the role of human capacity to cope autonomously with life's ever-changing physical, emotional and social challenges, and to function with fulfillment and a feeling of well-being with a chronic disease or disability. And as you can see from now, of this physical, social and economical dimensions, only the physical dimension is measurable comprehensively, which again limits its use. Now coming to the next question. The next explain why is about improvement of treatment either increases or decreases the prevalence of disease. So don't get intrigued that the same intervention can increase and can decrease. There is a very basic explanation to this. So let's go through it. With science and technology enriching the modern healthcare and result in improvement in treatment, there are perceptible changes in both the morbidity as well as mortality of disease concerned. Since improved treatment is ensuring there is increased number of recovered cases, decreasing the duration of illness, resulting in decreased prevalence in some diseases. On the other hand, treatment may be such that by preventing the disease, but it is not producing complete recovery. It is leading to increased life expectancy in the morbid patients and hence causing a paradoxical increase in the prevalence of the concerned disease. Furthermore, if the duration is decreased sufficiently, a decrease in prevalence could take place despite an increase in the incidence of the disease. Well, this one is a requested question by one of my students. So let's go with this. This explanatory mentions tip of iceberg is most appropriately represented by PEM, that is protein energy malnutrition. Let's first understand the analogy of iceberg. Whenever we talk of iceberg in epidemiological perspective, the tip of the iceberg represents the clinically evident disease or condition, and the submerged portion represents the subclinical disease which often goes undetected, and some of it may be detected by the use of screening. So the large hidden part constitutes the mass of the unrecognized portion of the disease in the population, and this often determines the fate of any disease control program. So let's see in context of. Let us presume this is the iceberg of protein energy malnutrition. We see only the severe protein energy malnutrition is above the waterline, which indicates that it is only the overt malnutrition with detectable signs which are visible to the epidemiologists or the clinicians, whereas when the protein energy malnutrition progresses in the very beginning, when the child just starts having the food gap is nothing but the gap between the growth requirement and the intake of the nutrition. So if there is a gap, that is the requirement is not matched with the nutritional support the child is getting, a food gap will be generated, and this can lead to primary or secondary protein energy malnutrition, which will slowly manifest through ceasing of the linear growth. Then there will be a static weight, that is the child will not gain weight but neither lose weight of the present weight. Then there will be a phase when the child will further progress if this food gap continues and it is not detected. The child will start having weight loss, leading to increased amount of weight loss and finally leading to wasting. And eventually, when it is finally very visible, detectable and comes across to the healthcare delivery point, it is overt malnutrition. So the iceberg, that is T, it's only coming when there is overt malnutrition. Most of the spectrum of protein energy malnutrition remains undetected, that is analogous with the submerged portion of the iceberg. So hope this is understood. Thank you so much for the question request. Now another one of that sort. This one is about the epidemic of hepatitis A is an example of propagated epidemic. If you go to my, check my basic concept series, you will find a comprehensive listing of the different types of epidemic. So I'll just elaborate on that. If you need to check back, you can always check back. I'll give it in the description box, the link. So why is the epidemic of hepatitis A considered as an example of propagated epidemic? So let's look at a hypothetical distribution of hepatitis, and you can see in this particular curve that there is a gradual rise, there is a tailing off, there are two peaks, there's more than one peaks. So to satisfy the propagated epidemic, an epidemic has to be infectious in origin, usually with person-to-person spread. There is a gradual rise and tail off, often with farther waves over the longer period of time. Transmission continues till depletion of susceptible population, and communicability depends on herd immunity. All these criteria are satisfied by hepatitis A, and hence it is called an example of propagated epidemic. This time we are coming to some explain whys from the screening section. So this one reads, screening tests and diagnostic tests are not synonymous. Well, the primary purpose of screening tests is to detect the infection or early disease or risk factors for a disease in an apparently healthy individual who are not seeking care. The purpose of the diagnostic test, whereas, is to establish the presence or absence of disease or true abnormality as a basis for treatment of decisions in symptomatic or screening positive individuals. So basically they are coming for a confirmatory test. Let's have a look at a comparison between the two. Screening tests, if you see, their purpose is to detect the potential disease indicators, whereas diagnostic tests is to establish the presence or absence of the disease. The target population in screening tests, a large number of asymptomatic but potentially at-risk individuals. And diagnostic tests, symptomatic individuals to establish diagnosis or asymptomatic individuals with a positive screening test. The test methods in screening are usually simple, acceptable to the patients and staff. In diagnostic tests, it may be invasive, expensive, but justifiable as necessary to establish or confirm the diagnosis. The positive result threshold is generally chosen to a high sensitivity, not to miss out the potential disease. Whereas in diagnostic cases, this is chosen towards high specificity, that is true negatives. More weight is given to accuracy and precision than to patient acceptability. Positive result, it usually indicates suspicion of disease, often used in combination with other risk factors that warrants the confirmation. And diagnostic tests usually provide a definitive diagnosis. Coming to the cost, screening tests are usually cheap. Benefits should justify the cost as large number of people will be subjected to it. Whereas diagnostic tests are higher costs associated because we are aiming at confirming the diagnosis. Another screening associated explain why, that is screening and case finding are not synonymous. Well, screening, as you all already briefed that it is a search for unrecognized disease or defect by means of rapidly applied tests, examination or other procedures. For example, breast cancer screening using mammography. Breast case finding is more incidental. That is, use of clinical and or laboratory tests to detect the disease in individuals seeking healthcare for other reasons. For example, VDRL testing to detect syphilis in a pregnant woman who's actually coming for her antenatal care. A very important question, and which also requires you to be very clear in the conceptual level. So that is, the sensitivity and specificity in a screening test are inversely related. So let's have a visual interpretation. Let's look at this purple box and look at this circles, mauve circles, as the persons on whom the screening test is being applied. So let the threshold value, cutoff value of the blood sugar being tested, if we set it at a higher point, what is happening? Here you can see, if it is put it in the higher end of the blood sugar level, only 7 subjects in the top box will be qualifying as diabetic, and the rest, all the purple circles in the bottom box, will be treated as normal individuals. In the same cohort, let's have a look. What if we shift the cutoff point much lower? So if you're using a screening test using a lower cutoff point, what is happening? 31 subjects in the top box are qualifying as diabetic, and only a few, around 9, are qualifying as normal. So you can see the shift of yield of positive diabetic patients just as we shift the bar of the cutoff point of blood sugar. So what is the relationship between sensitivity and the specificity then? Well, if you look at this curve, in one side there is the healthy portion, then another side there is the diseased portion, and in the curve in the left side indicates the true negatives, that is, who are actually healthy with no disease, and curve on the right side indicates the true positives, that is, who are actually diseased. But if you see here, in any situation there is always an overlap, because no test is 100% sensitive and 100% specific. So there is always a overlap area. So if we set up the cutoff point at this intersection point, in one side we have the false negatives, that is, we will have certain portion of the true positive getting into the true negatives, yielding to false negative cases, that is, who are not negative but treated as negatives. So they are false negatives. At the same time, there will be a yield of false positive cases, that is, whom we will be treating as positive, but in reality they are negatives. So what if we shift this cutoff line? What is happening? There is a change. This area is going for a change. That is, the false positive will be increasing. Now, what if we shift it to the right? This time, the false negative will increase. So either way, whenever you are shifting the cutoff point either to the left or to the right, there will be always a change in the yield. That is, if you move the cutoff line to the left, there will be increased sensitivity, but specificity will be reduced. Whereas, if you move the cutoff line to the right, there will be increased specificity, but sensitivity will be reduced. So, every time the cutoff value, wherever you place it, it will affect the other. So, that is why it is called that specificity and sensitivity are inversely related. So, if the diagnostic test is expensive or invasive, so we have to minimize the false positive and use a cutoff point with high specificity. And if the penalty for missing a case is high, like fatal, easily it spreads, you have to maximize the true positive and use a cutoff point with high sensitivity. Generally, a screening test should be highly sensitive, whereas a follow-up confirmatory test should be highly specific. This situation, it is serving as an excellent example of successful parasite. So till now, we have dealt quite a few explain whys, and we are going to take up some more interesting explain whys in second part. Do stay tuned. And again, I am mentioning, please follow this channel, subscribe to it, share it, like it, and do drop in the comment box if there is any particular academic requirement on your part regarding your examination. I'll be happy to help. So, happy studying till we meet next time with the next presentation. Do click the bell icon, which will help you to know whenever I upload another academic content. Have a great day. Thank you.